All right. On today's episode, we interviewed John Martinka, where we talked about what it's like to be an intermediary, right? And really representing buyers and sellers. And what are some things that he's seen in the industry around buyers and how that changed over the past 30 years. And at the same time, right, what's going on with sellers? What do sellers do well? What do they not do well? What should a seller do in terms of preparing their company for an exit? So Casey, what were some of your takeaways?
It always comes back to the numbers, man. The thing I could say on every podcast, everything that we talk to, you've got to know your numbers. You've got to take care of your accounting as it's the most important thing in your business, right? I mean, I know sales is always important. Trust me, sales trumps everything. But at the end of the day, you've got to do your accounting right. So if you short side your accounting, you're going to pay for it on your exit. You're going to pay for it at some point, right? So know your numbers, grow your numbers. Man, I took that from John in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and then some of the funny things is really talking about, okay, on the buy side, right, we know that space has changed. There's more unsophisticated people coming into the market, and that's a given. But on the sell side, right, sounds like not much has changed, and you still have sloppy sellers, right? Regardless of having better tools out there, it's just that most businesses, especially in the small and medium space, just aren't that sophisticated. And I think that's the opportunity, right? That's what we look for whenever we buy a business. It's really taking those family-owned businesses and making them management-led. And so lots of information on that topic.
All right. Hey, it's Casey here. Mark your calendars for November 1st. It's going to be another M&A Launchpad conference. This is going to be power-packed. We continue to add incredible value around independent sponsors, the ETA, women in entrepreneurship, anybody that's thinking about buying, selling, acquiring, growing, anything around your business. This is going to be very, very nice there in Chicago on November 1st. And you can find us at the M&ALaunchpad.com. You're going to use the code LAUNCH, and this is going to give you $150 off of the event. We look forward to seeing you out there November 1st in Chicago, M&A Launchpad.
John, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, you're joining us from Seattle, huh?
I'm outside of Seattle, Kirkland, Washington.
I know exactly where that is. I've driven by that Costco a million times. The Rose Hill Starbucks there was my favorite place to go sit and work for hours upon hours. But John, for listeners, right? So you obviously work really closely with buyers and sellers. So you want to just give the listeners a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure. I've been doing this for a long time. I got into it through serendipity. Timing was right when a guy I had become friends with said, I've always thought you'd be good in this business. And we had got to know each other as back-to-back presidents of a small local Rotary club in Kirkland. And, you go to all those board meetings and all the other stuff and you show what you can do. And, he just said it and the timing was right. And that was back in the mid 90s. So actually it's about 30 years. And that's how I got into it. I've done a lot of work with buyers. My daughter started working with me 7.5 years ago.
Oh, that's great.
And she actually came to the conclusion, I like the sell side better. And so, while she helps out when we have some buyers, we really, concentrate on the lower middle market selling. And she likes that a lot.
And are you focused primarily in, Washington, Seattle? Is that where you're focused, or are you nationwide? How are your projects usually run?
We've had clients in at least 15 states. Most of what we are focused on is in the Northwest, Seattle, Portland, et cetera. The world is getting smaller. The country's getting smaller with things like we're recording online and Zoom and Teams and all of that I used to think, well, why would anyone here in Seattle be listing with an intermediary in Denver or Chicago? But we're getting leads in different places, and it's even with a local client and a local buyer, we're doing Zoom meetings to start off.
Yeah.
And you think about it from an owner side, I don't want too many people coming through the business unless I'm sure who they are. And Zoom or Teams is a great way to do that.
Yeah, it's a nice little introductory touch. And then you got to get belly to belly.
Yeah, we always preach. You got to get it out of the Zoom, right? You got to get in front of them in person just to really solidify that.
You have to, but it's better than a phone call.
Yes.
Got it. So John, I mean, you've been doing this for a while, right? Maybe before we kind of hop into buyers and sellers, the question I have actually is like, what have you seen change in the industry, right? In the 90s, what were the buyers and sellers? What did they look like? In 2000s, what did they look like? And, we're in 2025 now. What are the transition that you've seen? Because I'm guessing it's been very different, or maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Things are different. Technology. Back in the 90s and the aughts, how you want to sell a business, you run as an intermediary or an owner, you ran an ad in the newspaper. Now where do you go? You go online, and you got the biz buy sells of the world, which, as you know, there's a lot of junk, a lot of small stuff, and of course it's evolved into other sites like Axio, which is aimed at the PE world and buyers like you. The fundamentals of business haven't changed that much, though, and of deals. You still have to get a return on investment. You still have to get working capital. I heard you say on one of your podcasts, working capital is the fuel that runs the company. Yeah. And you still have to get that stuff, and you still have to investigate the books and talk to the employees and talk to some customers blindly, of course. I'm doing a reference check or something like that. But those fundamentals haven't changed. What has changed is the plethora of younger, inexperienced buyers, that whole search community. And, I got into this business, and people were saying 90% of buyers, individual buyers, never buy a business. And I don't know if you guys know Richard Parker, Rick Diomo. He has he's had a course for 20 some years. I've got it here. He's a good friend. How to buy a good business at a great price.
I have heard of that one. Yes.
Yeah. And he's an investment banker in Florida. And I asked him a while back, Richard, you always said 90% never buy. What do you think it is now? He goes, I'm saying 94, because there are more tire kickers than ever. Mm-hmm. They also have a way to get out there on different sites like Search Funder and other communities, that they're more visible. So that's something that's changed.
Got it. So ultimately, you're saying basically more noise, right? Maybe less sophistication, and I think it's with technology, right? There's more information out there, like this podcast, right? It's easier. 10 years, 20, 30 years ago, you couldn't find information on how to buy business. So now people find it, and people are infatuated with it. It's sexy. Buying a business is the entrepreneurial's dream, right? But then they kind of, ignore how hard it is, right? And so it's a lot of people get out there, they're infatuated with the idea, but once it comes time to put pen to paper and commit and maybe put money up and go close on something or act, they stumble, they don't act, right? And, you see that kind of rinse and repeat itself.
It's usually when they have to sign for the personal guarantee.
Yeah.
It is a common thing. I've written one of the books I've written. The first one is called "Buying a Business That Makes You Rich." It's aimed at the individual buyer, and in the preface it says, "You're going to make a leap of faith. You just want to do your homework and do it off a chair, not the rough."
Oh, I like that.
And they get in a lot of these buyers get in their little groups and communities, and to politely say that it can be like the blind leading the disabled. That they start talking about certain things and that have no basis in reality. And they convince themselves that's the way to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's where, whether it's some of the other people I've heard on your podcast, the due diligence Q&A guy, the attorney, people like us, that's where, the experience that those of us have that can say either slow down, you're moving too fast, or speed it up. You're going to drag this out and the seller's going to kick you out.
So, John, you make a point here, and this is so our listener base. We've got a large amount of people that are considering buying a business for the first time, right? Yeah. And for you, dealing with thousands and thousands of different buyers and sellers, what can these listeners do today to, when they work with a guy like you on a deal, for you to respect it, for you to be like, yes, I understand this is your first time. And like, what are those norms that we need to do in order for them to validate to you? Because there's a lot of new searchers, and there's a lot. I was a first time searcher, and I had to close a deal. So what can they do? What are those steps? What are those little check boxes you think when you talk to these people that you're like, you know what, I'm going to help this person, or I believe in them?
Well, I think one big thing is to realize sellers control the deal on a good company. The buyer controls the deal when it's a lousy company. And you can't convince yourself that just because you're there and you're smart and you got an MBA or whatever, that they're going to give you the deal of a lifetime. Because if it's a good business, they control it, and there's going to be multiple buyers for it, qualified buyers. I mean, you guys, as I see you, you're not looking, like this is your first rodeo on business. First you worked at Microsoft, you got experience, you worked with other people, you ran things. That's really important, that experience. Another thing is, don't get buyer fever. Don't get so enamored with something that you suspend common sense and, realize that you are, turnarounds make headlines for a reason. They're rare. Yeah. So if you're looking at something, say, let's break even, but I can fix this pretty easy. Okay. Hope you have a lot of cash to fix it.
Yeah. No, and people need to understand. I mean, it's all statistics, right? Most businesses fail, right? So again, the business you're going to buy, if you're buying any business, it's most likely to fail. So if you buy a business with a track record of success for many years, well, now you're reducing the odds, right? Well, in addition to that, not only do most businesses fail, now the ones that fail, the turnaround is even harder than the business. So, why make your first acquisition a turnaround, right? Like, it's really hard to do that. And so statistics are not in your favor. And yes, sometimes they work out and they can work out really well. But at the same time, you still probably, if it's your first acquisition, you probably have a lot more to learn. And so why do that on turnaround that's going to burn you out and you're probably never going to do an acquisition again versus something that's steady Eddie and you're just looking at making incremental improvements?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Another thing is too much debt. And I'm sorry, but there are lenders out there who will go to very low debt coverage ratios, and they just want to make the loan. Good bankers, good lenders will insist on a solid debt coverage ratio. I say at least 1.5 to 1, unless there's some extraordinary circumstances to make it a little lower. But in the SBA world, where individuals are, it's 1.5 to 2 should be mandatory. That's how you grow the company, is having some working capital.
Yeah. I was hearing the other day, I was talking to somebody and I thought this, or it was maybe a podcast or something I was listening to, but I thought it was very astute. The guy said, assume the first year that you buy a company that whatever multiple or whatever your EBITDA was, it's going to cut in half. If you assume your business that you buy just that first year, change, switch over and all that, can you make it work if that cuts in half? And it was really, because I've now experienced on 3 acquisitions, on 2 of them, that's kind of been the trend. It doesn't stay that consistent growth model because there's change, there's now debt, there's all these things that you're adding to it. So what are your thoughts? What have you seen over the years? What have you seen in that first 1 or 2 years after these guys close? Or do you even stay in contact with these guys once they buy them?
I do. Get repeat business too on the buy side. Just a past client called me the other day and say, yeah, I had dinner with my number one competitor. He wants to sell to me. Can you help me? Of course I can. Here's the information you need to get. I haven't seen too much that drastic as cut in half, but any kind of stress test. I know banks will run a stress test. What happens if the business goes down 20%? If they have a top customer, what happens if that top customer goes away? And that's part of due diligence, because you say, this one customer is 22% of our sales. What is it to your gross profit? I've got a prospective client, and he keeps talking about, I've known him forever, his latest classic entrepreneur, his latest business is really doing well. And I go, you have a dominant customer, they're 20-some%. He says, yes. Although their margins are so low, if I lost them, I could recoup that pretty easily. That's different than if your top customer is at 20-some%, has a high gross margin.
Yeah. I mean, a sophisticated buyer understands there's a difference between top revenue and top profit, and those are two different lenses to look at it. And it's not about just, hey, I lost my biggest customer, now it's terrible. Well, if you're not making much on them to begin with, it's not so bad. Maybe your second largest customer is actually the more important one. So,
yeah. Well,
And
and we're, it's all those things. We're working with a company now. Let's put it, the owners are of an age where they don't want to do much but check in.
Sure.
And they make that very clear. And someone says, how would you grow this business? They say, well, if we were younger, we don't want to grow it, but if we were younger, we wanted to grow it, we would replace, this segment of business that's commodity, very low margin, and go after the higher margin stuff that's out there. So that's the kind of, that's due diligence that buyers have to go into, not just get enamored by, here's my bottom line. And, I heard your one podcast, you're talking with the Q of E guy, you're talking about EBITDA, and one of you interrupted him and said, no, EBITDA is not profit.
Yeah,
especially in a CapEx intensive business. Yeah. And, a little later he said, EBITDA is cash flow. And I would disagree with that too. It is not always cash flow because, I've seen, you've seen it too, but they go out and buy a new piece of equipment for $500,000. And the CPA says, well, you got a 5-year note and you should depreciate this over 5 years. And they say, no, I want it all now. Well, years 2, 3, and 4, you're making principal payments with nothing to write off against them.
Yep. No, I mean, and again, EBITDA, you should not base your buy on the EBITDA. You really got to look at net cash at the bottom line, because otherwise, again, it depends on the business. Software company, great, your EBITDA is very reflective. And you're in a manufacturing company, it is the worst number to even really base anything off of, right? And so you really have to dig in and understand the nuances, and that's what experience matters. And that's where, having a good intermediary, it helps guide you that to some extent too. So, John, I think, if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like you're seeing less sophistication from buyers. What about sellers though, right? With technology, with ease of accounting, all these things, are you seeing over the years, have you seen more sophistication come from there, or has it been kind of the same thing?
Can I laugh out loud?
Sure. Go for it.
I use the phrase small business accounting because you never know what you're going to get.
Uh-huh.
Too many small businesses, the accounting department is, I call it Cinderella syndrome, the weak little stepsister off in the corner. The owner wants to manage the customers, the product, the sale, whatever, the operations. And the accounting is a necessary evil. And, there's some really good ones. We've been fortunate that a lot of the companies we've represented lately have been clean as a whistle, no personal expenses, good books. But there's one now, and the two owners, the wives do the books, and the CPA told me, yeah, they do the books, but they're not bookkeepers. So
that's concerning.
He has some work to do when he gets in there. It's I wouldn't say it's improved much at all.
Just
because you're in QuickBooks doesn't mean you're entering it into the right accounts, et cetera, et cetera.
Still kind of a mixed bag.
So, John, here's kind of my big question here. So, over the years, you've seen people buy companies, grow them, and try to sell them in 5 years, flip out of them, try to make profit. And then you've seen people buy companies and then they have the hold mentality. They want to hold them and grow them.
Yeah.
Where have you seen the most successes, right? Is it the buy hold mentality, the evergreen, to buy it, grow it, continue to go? Or are you seeing more like, hey, get it to where you need to go. The best time to sell it is when you're at the top and get out?
Yeah. So we can differentiate. If we have on one end, we have private equity, family office buyers, and there are different. Private equity does a lot of your true private equity with the fund wants to buy and get out. And if you have a 10-year fund and they buy you in year 4, they're going to start selling you in 5 years later. Family office, professional buyers, but they want to hold. Individuals tend to want to hold. And I've had numerous buyer clients that have bought multiple companies. One of my favorites is a guy who bought 4 in his one industry. Another client who's become a good friend has bought 3. He's grown from first acquisition was a $5 million a year sales company. Last time we talked, he was at 50.
Oh.
And a huge chunk of that came from a couple acquisitions.
And that creates generational wealth, right? I mean, when you see these buyers that are trying to just, hey, let's make some money, let's get in, let's buy, let's pay out our investors. But at least in my experience from the people I have seen that have had the buy hold mentality, they're focused more on creating wealth than just trying to generate, a return. And so,
right.
It's also a different way of how you're going to enter the business.
Yeah. And the last one I mentioned, he's brought his two sons in to work in the business. One of them from took a pay cut from a very lucrative position in the tech industry to come work in Dad's company, and he hopes they will take it over someday.
Yeah, I love it. I have that conversation with my wife. I always tell her, I'm like, I would love the kids to come. I'm building enterprise so the kids can come. She's like, they're their own people. Do not force them to come work for you. And I'm like, but why is it like me? I'm thinking legacy, right? I'm thinking like, how hard is it to be an entrepreneur? My dad was get a job, go to school. That was his mentality. When I said I was going to be an entrepreneur, he just was like, you're crazy. And then all the work that I've done over the last 25, 26 years as an entrepreneur to stabilize and grow a business, I want those kids to be able to take advantage of running a business, right? And then not the idea of that, hey, let's just go out. And it's one of those mentalities when you talk to people about having them come work for you. So it's a big thing for me is legacy. That, and I buy on legacy. When Feras and I are talking to customers or we're talking to a seller, we want to respect the legacy, respect the business. I mean, that's a big conversation piece that we come from.
Yeah.
So I think it's always nice, especially for our listeners, everybody wants to buy something, clean it up and make a quick buck. But that generational wealth usually comes from that mentality of let's buy a business. Let's get it into a position where, hey, it could be sold because we're doing the right things, but have the mentality that first 5 years, you're probably not going to make a ton of money. But then after you get the debt paid down, then after you got things cleaned up, you get the right people in the right seats, right? It's that 5 year on is where that generational wealth, where that money starts to come in, where you can make another acquisition, where you can develop and grow your enterprise. Is that kind of what you've seen for some of your long-term customers that have continued to buy?
Yeah, I would say that, although a lot of them, it's been quicker than 5 years. And maybe it's because we tend to be pretty fussy and we screen buyers hard to get the people who can do that. Does that mean they all do it? No. I think of some of my clients that have businesses now for 10 or 15 years that haven't done much. And often it's they're getting in their own way. Yeah, they just can't make a decision. Just aren't growth oriented. Maybe say the big risk was buying the business. I don't want to take too much risk growing it too fast. Who knows? But that's every situation. People start a business, traditional business, not a tech business, and some of them make it and most don't.
Yep.
So to the other part of it, so I buy a business. What are those things that we should be doing at that time to get it ready to sell?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what is the mistake most sellers make, right? Or how do you prep a business for sell?
So I did startup for 17 years, and it was in our second startup when I met a guy that said, "Listen, you've got to start building your data room today to get ready to sell. You need to be thinking about what the exit looks like, and so make sure you put your data room when you do your financials. Make sure you get a reviewed financials or an audit or whatever these things are that then allow us, when someone does tap on our door, they come and buy it. And with energy funders." We built that over 5 years, and I had built such a great data room. We did get our financials reviewed. We did all these things. And when the buyer did show up, they were very impressed. And we were able to get the deal done. So what is that mindset we need to have as we're buying these businesses?
Well, you hit on one is financial. We talked about that a little bit before, and good systems, accurate statements. Don't run personal expenses through the business. Make it clean. I think on one of your podcasts, someone is saying there's some buyers who would say, "You run personal expenses through the business. We don't consider them," which they shouldn't. They've already been paid for that by not paying tax, which is short-sighted, by the way, because if just use round numbers, $100,000 of personal expenses on the federal level, it's maximum 37% tax, and that $100,000 at a 4 to 5 multiple is a lot more than $37,000 for a few years. Well, let me ask you, as I preface this next one, what do you guys do on a daily basis in your companies?
So I let me speak, because Feras can talk about the side he is as the CEO. He's over several different types of businesses, including property management. But I'll take H&M, for instance. And in the early days, right, I was the integration. So I got in there to get the right teams moving. We're now 26 months later. Now I'm working with audit to get ready do our opening balance sheet audit, to recap the business, to do these things, because as more of an independent sponsor, we brought in an executive level management team to run the business. And so we're looking for the next acquisition. We're making board meetings. We're doing those kind of things. So that at H&M is a big play. Yesterday, I was at our smaller business we bought in the wastewater business, and I was sitting at the QuickBooks because the lady we hired quit after a week. So I was doing the basic stuff. So you kind of got a little bit of everything from us over here.
Yeah, and I think.
Well, other than that last one, your first part of it, if I had a bell, I'd ring it and say, basically ka-ching, because you're not working on in the business in a day to day, and that's the thing I hear the most from attorneys and other investment banker types, accountants, is their clients. The business is too dependent on their clients, the owners. And it's, so you asked about that. What else?
As a seller, you have to work yourself out of it. Otherwise, you're too much of a valuable piece and no one's going to want to buy the business, right? If the business can't support you not being a part of it, well, then you don't really have a business.
Yeah, that's great.
Right? So.
Yeah. Well, you're working on, what Casey said, and that is, he's up there and working on the big picture. That's what an owner should get themselves in the position to do, and they have to delegate, and it's tough to delegate, especially if you're a founder. Yep. Less so as a buyer. But that's a really big one. Is that no matter what size company, the less the owner is responsible for on the day to day, the better.
I completely agree. And another way to maybe look at it too, because we were talking about sellers and getting it ready, and ultimately as a seller, if you don't have a way to value your business, meaning like today, if I can't tell you my business is worth 20 million and here's the reasoning behind it, well, how do you expect a buyer to? Right. And so if you don't have the financials, you don't have the organization, you don't have all the things to be able to answer that question, well, then again, you're not ready to sell. And so that's kind of really another lens I look at. We have multiple different businesses, and some of them are in, better state than others, financially, profitability, all the above. But like, there's some of them I can't even really quantify, in case they were having this conversation earlier today. So then what is that business actually worth? And how do you explain that to a seller or a buyer? So it's definitely another lens that kind of people need to consider.
We have a prospective client, and when I first met him through his attorney a couple years ago, and I said, well, send over your financial statements. He said, I don't have financial statements. He said, my CPA takes the stuff and does the taxes. I said, you're not going to sell your business without financial statements. And I'm serious. He said, I don't have them. We just track revenue. And he's worked with his CPA, who is with a really good firm, good guy. He now has financial statements. The first batch he gave me, I'm not an accountant. I'm really good at seeing inconsistencies. And, last week I took some financial statements and just marked them up. What's this? These items on the balance sheet look like P&L line items and stuff like that. Scanned them in, sent them to the owner. But, you see that all the time. And he now his financial statements make sense. There's no goofy stuff on the balance sheet. The CPA did what he was supposed to do. And that's, as you said, that's a huge difference.
No, I completely agree.
What do you think about reviewed? If somebody called you and say, hey, we review our financials every year, or hey, we do an audit every year. I mean, do you feel like those give those businesses much more value to the buyer, more trust in the process?
I think the reviewed statements really make a difference as you get into professional buyers. And that would be whether you call it private equity, family office, you guys called yourself independent sponsors. Now everyone who doesn't have money says, I'm an independent sponsor. But
they also say they're searchers too. I mean, you could put it in whatever bucket you want. We call the independent sponsor basically the mindset of we are not actively running the businesses day to day. Our intention is to buy, scale with and we don't raise a big fund. We are project by project fundraise.
The more you get into buyers, like you've bought a couple companies and you buy more, you get into the, people use the term micro PE or private, there are different. It used to be private equity was big, private equity, 5 million of EBITDA or nothing. And now there's, different stratas, 5, 3, 2, whatever. But you get into those kind of buyers versus John or Jane Doe, who's going to buy and run their own company. Reviewed statements will make a difference.
That is an important thing because accounting is where I typically go to in that first year when we get into a business is to really get that accounting down to a science.
Yeah.
And then getting it reviewed. So like right now at H&M, we had a great start in the first 6 months. We dealt with Murphy's Law in year number 2. It happens. We got a ton of deferred maintenance, hurricane, everything you can imagine, kind of punted the audit. So right now we're cleaned up our balance sheet. We're now going into the opening balance sheet audit and auditing 2024 so we can recapitalize. And it's a bigger business. It's around 25 million revenue. So these are those steps that we're doing, and we're doing it internally for our partners and our investors and our people. It's not just so we can turn around and sell it. Yeah. I feel like these are the right things you do in a larger business, or at least a more of a middle market business to create that trust in what we're doing.
And it gets you more sell ready, right? That's the other piece of it too. So if we ever did, again, we are more long-term, but if we did want to make an exit, it's a lot more, straightforward to value and a lot more straightforward for a buyer to go pick it up and go get the financing they want or whatever else they need it for. So,
yeah. Well, I have a friend who 6 years now, right before COVID, 60-year-old family business. He was third generation, done very, very well. He had a private equity backed firm in a complementary industry say, we want you. We want to grow into your space. It's similar to ours, but not the same. And he was ready. His financials were ready because he paid attention to the statements, his KPIs, everything else. He was meticulous on it.
Yeah,
he got a big exit.
So for those listeners, he got
an offer he couldn't not refuse.
And being guys that are aggregating and talking to sellers and doing this stuff, I meet so many people that haven't reviewed their financials. There's all, and we see those as potential buying opportunities, right? Things that we can do. If somebody's still using paper for a lot of their customer relationship, we see these are all opportunities for us to bring in tech, bring in these resources, and add that value, and then we'll do the review and make the value of that business better.
Yeah, and then for those that do have their KPIs, that do know their stuff, we respect that and we give that a value, right? And so that makes it, hey, there's less of the sausage making to be built. Instead, we can focus on actual just growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like you talked about paper. I think back to a guy who bought a company. It was a lower middle market deal. It was $5-6 million. Really nice company, and the ownership was a mess. They had brought in the original seller, to run the company because they were trying to run it blindly absentee, and she liked paper checks. Everything was paper checks. She had to sign them. He immediately switched over to electronic payments, either ACH or credit card. ACH coming in. What a difference.
Yeah, that's what we're doing right now over
but it freed up people.
Yep. Freed up time. You have a better way to audit and track it and see it, all the above. So, and
you reduce theft because, check theft is surprisingly, it's a real thing. Yeah. Until you experience it, you don't know.
Cool.
Yeah, he also put in wherever he could pay by credit card. He had 2 credit cards with like half a month apart on when they were due, and so certain times you would use one credit card, then the other one, so he could get the float. And at the same time, he was accumulating a lot of points or cash back or whatever else.
Yeah, awesome.
Very nice.
So, it sounds small, but
No, it's all those incremental improvements. And again, for those of you listening, right, that's how you get your business ready for a sell, right? All the incremental improvements to clean it up, get it going, and that way you can make it opportune for the next buyers. So,
right.
All right. So I guess with that said, I guess, we can go ahead and shift on to our rocket round where we ask our guests the same 3 questions.
Yeah. So first question for you, John, is what do you like to do in your free time?
Well, the day-to-day stuff in my free time is we've got a couple dogs. We love playing with them. We take them for walks just about every day. And I do pay attention to working out like 5 times a week.
Nice.
And stuff like that. But the big picture is I have been very involved for the last 20 years with my Rotary Club. We do a project every year. We have last 15, 18 years, we've been going to Antigua and Barbuda in the Caribbean.
Nice.
We take high school students in a Cisco, the networking company, and they take a curriculum on how to network things. We've donated well over 10,000 laptops to the schools down there, including 3,000 in the last 2 years. And the students go down there. They get hosted by local families for 12 days. They work not only distributing computers, but setting up Wi-Fi networks in schools and nonprofits.
Incredible.
And I put a lot of very rewarding time in that. In fact, in an hour and a half, I have a meeting with someone from Antigua about our next year's project.
Awesome.
That is incredible.
That's an awesome story. All right. Next moment, most memorable moment in your business journey.
When I realized that I should not emulate the guy who got me into it, because I tried to be like him, and his personality is much different and much more direct. And I'm really more of a relationship guy. He's more of a transaction guy to get clients. And once I realized I can't be like him, life was better in business.
Find what you do well. Find what you do well. And all right. And what is your favorite tool or resource?
My experience.
I love it.
Fair enough. I mean, it's funny. I used to be young and naive, right? Like I had my own, I had made money playing off of games of anything in middle school. Then high school, I had my own web company and, did well with that. Or my friends were flipping burgers at McDonald's, and I was making good money on the web. And, there was a point in time where I was just like, man, like people give too much value to experience, right? Just very naive. And as I've gotten older, I realized, man, experience is king. There's a lot of things that you don't know that help you make the right decision. It's not about just being able to learn something. It's about being able to choose a thing that you shouldn't choose because of your experience.
Yeah. And you're right. And this whole scale that leads up to unconscious competent, that you just know what to do. My daughter says that to me all the time. Can you explain that? Because you just know it. And we found that in business buying and selling, it's really important to explain that, because buyers might get frustrated. Why didn't they tell me that before? Because they don't think about it. It's just on autopilot that they do those things. So what we do when we're marketing a company, we tell buyers, you're going to expect this, but we put out a supplemental form to the memorandum that is like, follow-up Q&A, all the things the sellers have shared or buyers have asked or we've asked after it's been written. And here's this list of stuff, because they never thought about it before. It was just, so second nature.
It's pretty amazing. That's awesome.
Awesome, John. Well, thank you very much. And I guess to maybe put a wrap, how can listeners get a hold of you?
They can go to our website, nokomisadvisory.com, NOKOMIS advisory.com. I've got a YouTube channel and a podcast channel. Our podcast is called Getting the Deal Done.
Love it.
And if they reach out to me and mention this podcast, I'll send them e-copy of one of my books, either on buying a business, growth by acquisition, or our latest book, Exit Risk Style, Grace and More Money.
Awesome. Oh, I want a copy of those. So I'll be emailing you.
Okay.
All right. We'll make it happen. And we'll put that in the show notes for the listeners.
All right.
Hey, and John, just note November 1st, we're having our conference in Chicago, and we would love to have you come out and participate or be involved. So we'll send you an email about it, but it could be a way to get your new book out.
Okay.
Awesome.
Great.
All right.
Talk to you about it.
Perfect. Well, John,
thanks for being here with us.
Thank
really
you very much.
Yeah, this was really a good conversation. I enjoyed your questions, your input, and the pace.
You bet.
Outstanding.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to the M&A Launchpad Podcast. If you've enjoyed today's podcast and would like to support us, please leave us a rating and a review after you listen. I'm Casey Minshew, and I look forward to talking with you next week.